What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today's video, we are here with another Detroit Lions video, and today we are doing something that I think we started last year. We never finished it, so we'll see how it goes this year. If you guys enjoyed this, let me know. We'll continue with this, where we take a look at each positional group for the Detroit Lions and break down the need level at that positional group. We'll talk about players that are under contract, no longer under contract, how much we're paying to that positional group, what guys need to be brought back, what guys probably won't be brought back, all of those things position specific. So today we're taking a look at the cornerback position for the Lions. Well, let's get it started.
Fired up. It's made a great decision.
Great teammates, coaches, and other people who want to be Super Bowl champions. And we are. We're going to do it this year.
And we're going places because we want to go places.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
And welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here. And man, we're back. This one may be a little bit longer, so buckle in, man. Originally, I planned to do this entire secondary, include safety in this. I was like, you know what? This may take a minute, so let's not do that. Let's try to save some time here. Let's do that separately. If you guys enjoyed this, we can hit safeties. And also, this is a positional group that seems to be getting a ton of attention, and it's one that I've talked about a lot during the season. So this one may just take a little bit longer because of that. When we talk about how much of a need is there for this positional group, what do the Lions need? Where do we kind of expect possibly our players to be next season, and what their roles could be next year? And this is purely based on this past season. Well, mostly based on this last season. I went back, rewatched actually all of the games from this past year. So these videos take a little bit longer. So if you guys enjoyed this, let me know and we can continue. It's like key points that I noted from these players, maybe where I feel their role will be next year. Will the Lions re-sign them? All of those things. And then at the end, we'll decide what is the need level for the Lions here. What do we need to add to this positional group? In my opinion, heading into the next season, this is just my opinion on this. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below as we go through it. But the first thing we got to start off with as we do this, of course, is the current state. Who is under contract for the Lions? Which guys are set to become free agents for the Lions? And how much are we paying to these dudes? That's what we're going to start with first, and then we'll get into the players specifically. So let's dive right into it. I'm going to throw it on the screen. As you see, it says secondary because that was the original plan, but we're just doing cornerback today. Are guys that were with the Detroit Lions at the end of last season, so through the final week of the year, and also guys, of course, that got future deals. For example, AJ Parker, you'll see, is not on this list. He did play a little bit for us last year. However, AJ Parker has actually just been signed to a reserve future contract by San Francisco. So congrats to him, wishing him the best of luck, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So that's what this list is. So there may be guys missing here, like Cedric Boswell, right? They were with us in the preseason. I went back and looked at some of those, but I'm not including them on this list. They could be back with the Lions. They have connections, so there's definitely could be back. But we're talking about the guys that are either under contract that are no longer under contract that were with us at the end of this past season, or guys that have now been given future contracts, and kind of my thoughts on those players as well. So let's go through this real quick. We'll try to fly through this, starting off with Jeff Okudah. Of course, he's 24 years old. That's what the number represents. As you can see, he doesn't have a UFA or an RFA or an ERFA because he is under contract next season. Jeff Okudah is still under his rookie deal, but he's very interesting. We're going to talk about him probably the most. All right, what I saw from Jeff watching it back, my confidence level, but just sticking on his deal right now. He's a young player, as we know, but this was his third season. This past year was his third year. It doesn't feel like it because he hasn't played that much. Missed almost every snap in 2021 with an injury. 2020, we saw him a little bit in his rookie season. So this past year was really his first full year, even though he didn't play every game, but his first time really seeing him. It kind of felt like a rookie season. And on top of that, it was also his third year. So because he was a first-round pick, now the fifth-year option comes into play. You have to be a first-round pick for a fifth-year option to come into play, and that's what happens here with Jeff Okudah. And basically that means is that you have a deadline where a team, after the third year, there's a deadline. Team can decide whether or not they want to pick up that fifth-year option. What that basically does is it locks him in with that team for that fifth season, which is a year out. He's still under contract for this upcoming season, but it's the season after that they can make a decision on, and that locks him in. It has kind of a set price, sort of. It's based on other contracts. Guys like Daniel Jones, he didn't have his fifth-year option picked up. Right now, it looks like he's going to get extension. So if you don't pick it up, doesn't mean the guy can't come back. It just means that after this fourth year, he would be a free agent. So everyone can throw offers at the guy. So if he balls out in his fourth season, all of a sudden his value goes super high. Now all of a sudden you may be looking at like, dang, maybe we should have gave him that fifth-year option because his price is way higher than it was, and we could have had him locked up for another season. But I think it's also important to mention, depending on the price point and also how you set up a potential extension, there are scenarios where you could see it being better to actually just say, hey, we're not picking up the 5th year option because then it is all guaranteed. It's that set number. But if we set up the contract the way we want to, then maybe in that scenario, we could have a smaller cap hit for that season rather than what we're getting locked into by picking up your 5th year option. But it's also the risk because once you pick up that 5th year option, now it's all guaranteed, the 4th year and the 5th year. So there's really no out at that point. You can't really save money on the dude. You're locking into that guy. So with Jeff Okudah coming off of his 3rd season, his upcoming cap is a little bit over $10 million. It's kind of expensive, but it's the most expensive contract in this entire cornerback unit. We're not really spending much on the cornerback position currently with guys under contract. Reason being is, 1, there's not a ton of guys under contract, and 2, Jeff is really the only guy that's really getting paid here, and he's not even on an extension. It's just a rookie deal because of how high of a pick he was. Jacobs, an undrafted free agent, not a very expensive contract. Chase Lucas, 7th round pick, not very expensive. And then the future deals are also very cheap with no guarantees. So you can cut those, basically future deals kind of just get you into the offseason program. I guess that's the best way I've had it explained is, look, man, it's like $870K, somewhere around that range. You bring them back, but if you cut them, there's no dead cap because none of it's guaranteed. So it's just kind of getting them back in the building. So those guys can always move around. But with Jeff here, and we'll talk about it more when we get to him specifically, but I'm going to say it right now, man. I think it's very interesting. Jeff qualifies for the basic 5th year option because up to this point, he hasn't passed any of the qualifications in terms of Pro Bowl selections, in terms of snap counts needed to qualify for a little bit more expensive potential contract. Instead, he's going to fall into the basic 5th year option, which takes the average between the 3rd highest paid cornerback or player at his position, 25th highest paid, and that's what his 5th year option would be. I believe it's projected to be somewhere around like $11.5 million, so a little bit more than what his 4th year is currently set for his cap hit to be. So that's something the Lions will make a decision on. I believe the deadline is somewhere in May this year. I think that's the deadline if I have it correct. And again, now that it's the end of the 3rd year, they could start to discuss that and make that decision on whether or not they want to pick up that option with Jeff. They don't have to, but they definitely could and lock him in for that 5th year. Jerry Jacobs' situation is not completely the same, but it is kind of interesting as well when you look at his contract because he was an undrafted free agent. As we talked about, the price tag is not very expensive for this upcoming season, but it also is the final year currently on his contract because of the fact that undrafted free agents only get 3-year deals. It's one of the difference between being drafted and undrafted. You only get 3-year deals when you're an undrafted free agent, and because of that, when you look at his cap hit for this upcoming season, it's pretty darn cheap. It's like $940K, so for the Lions, it won't be super expensive, but there's a couple interesting things with this. One is that after that 3rd year, they will become a restricted free agent, not an unrestricted free agent, meaning that there is the options then to place tenders on that player, the 1st round tender, 2nd round tender, right of refusal, those kind of things that you could place on that player because they would have 3 seasons, but also an expiring contract. So that happens with all UDFAs. That's why you get a lot of restricted free agents. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. Could help the Lions bring him back for another season, potentially after this year. And again, because his contract is shorter when he's an undrafted free agent and it's only 3 seasons, he also has the opportunity to negotiate with the team now after his 2nd season. This is the 2nd season, so he can now negotiate going forward with the Detroit Lions on an extension or whatever that may be. So it's interesting there. Biggest thing is for this upcoming season, it's not a super expensive contract. He is under contract. If there is no extension, then for the 4th year, he'll be a restricted free agent, so the Lions can decide on that, but they can negotiate now. Will Harris, 28 years old now. Unrestricted free agent. He is now available. He has now finished up his rookie contract. A little bit of an older guy coming out of the draft, Boston College. Mike Hughes, also an unrestricted free agent. A little bit different. He signed to a 1-year deal with the Lions this past season, and that is obviously finished. So now he's an unrestricted free agent. He signed a $2.25 million this past season. Chase Lucas, the rookie draft pick from this past season. He was a draft pick, so it does give him that 4th year under contract. So he has 3 years left on his deal. Again, not very expensive in terms of cap hit because of the fact that he was a 7th round pick. Then you have Bobby Price, who is a restricted free agent, just like we talked about with Jerry Jacobs. After next season, he's in that category now where the Lions have the opportunities to possibly place a tender. I don't really anticipate that would happen. If they don't do that, he'll just become an unrestricted free agent. Lions can decide whether or not they want to bring him back. If you place a tender, it's cool because, like I said, you get like right of refusal, things like that. Or let's say you put a 2nd round tender. I don't expect that he's going to get that. He hasn't really played for us. The Lions are going to want to put a tender on him because of the fact that then there's money that's kind of guaranteed to it, and I think it's just too much. So I expect that he'll just become an unrestricted free agent, and we can decide whether or not we want to bring him back. Amani's an unrestricted free agent. He just finished up his rookie deal. Finally, you have Jaron Williams and you have Khalil Dorsey. Both of these guys were signed a futures contract. As you can see, we only technically have 3 guys under contract. Aside from the futures deals, that puts you at 5 guys under contract for the cornerback position. Okay, so Lions are going to have to make some additions there, whether it's the same guys back or new guys. We know they're not afraid to re-sign dudes. Before we get in and take a look at each of these players individually, I do want to show some stats because I think these are pretty promising as a group that I want to show just to bring some good energy before we get into these players individually. So let's take a look here. First off, we have the secondary stats, and I say secondary, but this includes everybody's linebackers, pressure, all of those stuff goes into this. These are the past defensive stats on the season for the Lions last year. Now hang with me though. Hang with me here. Okay, you can see they're not great. 25th pass rating, 30th in yards per game, especially considering the attempts against us. That's not great. 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio basically allowed there. Not bad in completion percentage, 63%, and then 7.9 yards per attempt, which is a big reason why the yards are so high, because there isn't always a ton of passing attempts against us, but we do give up a pretty good amount of chunks. Those don't look great, but that's on the season. Now here, let me give you some uplifting statistics. All right, take a look at this. This is since week 9. Now, I'm not just picking this week 9 because it's like, well, that was when it turned good. Like, that's not fair. I'm picking since week 9, and I've done this, I think, a few times, but that is when Jerry Jacobs really returned to the lineup. Before this, I think he had 1 defensive snap. This is when he got back into the mix. Now, this also includes, of course, the Mike Hughes getting looks at outside as well. Will Harris basically became the slot about this time, and that's what he was going forward. We had pieces moving in and out. Amani was moving in and out at this time, but this is when Jerry really returned. All right, it was against the Green Bay Packers, and he kind of became the guy once again on the outside, taking the spot from Amani there. And you can see these statistics from that point on. Now, the rankings are based on teams throughout the entire league on the entire season. That is just the Lions through that stretch. But where it would rank versus the entire season, if that makes any sense, 84.4 pass rating. A lot of that has to do with the interceptions, touchdown interception ratio, but that's top 10 in the league. 250 yards per game, which I said is not very good because look at the attempts. All right, we're 21st in attempts against us, so that's a lot of yards to give up. But 14 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, and first, yeah, that's right, it would have been first in completion percentage allowed at 58.5. That's pretty impressive. Now, you have to keep in mind who we played at this time. It was still half the season, and we played our divisional opponents. We played the Bears in here, the Packers, and the Vikings. You played Buffalo, you played Jacksonville, you played the Giants, but you also played, again, like Chicago, one of their games. They only had 7 completions for 21 attempts. So that kind of sways it a little bit, only 75 yards. But then again, you had Kirk Cousins go for 400 plus against us one time as well. So, you know, it's a little bit of a mix in there, but still, as a whole, those numbers are pretty good. Now, the run defense stats were basically the exact same as to what they were on the season. They went down to 6 yards in terms of yards per game. And again, you had some mixes in there, like you had good games against the Giants and the Vikings. And then you had games like Carolina where they went for 320 rushing yards. And it was like, well, that's going to mess up the whole statistics as a whole because they had 1,400 yards in that span. 300 of them came in one game. But the numbers are pretty good there. They're not bad. They bear out pretty well. And that was basically Jerry Jacobs returning to the lineup for the Lions, including some other moving pieces as well. So hopefully that gives you some optimism as we dive into some of these players individually. So let's take a look at each one of these players individually. On the left, you're going to see the statistics, and on the right, some of just the main notes that I took away from watching these players. Some of these I probably didn't update as much as I have the notes on the paper. Some of these have more than others, but this one doesn't have as many as some of the other players on this list. We're going to start with Jeff Okudah first. First off, just to point out the stats on the left, you have his normal stats first, games played, games started, normal stats, completion percentage, all of those things. Then you have his SIS stats, which are a little bit more advanced stats in terms of completions allowed on catchable passes, pass interference calls, and yards allowed through that, and then also his passes defended according to them. Then you have the player profiler stats, which is separation, per target allowed, and also his coverage rating. And then finally, you have his Pro Football Focus numbers. I thought I'd just throw those in there because people really like that stuff. So that is the stat breakdown. And like I said on the right, just some of the main notes. But I'll try not to spend too much time on these guys because there is a good amount to get through. But we're going to have to start with Jeff Okudah first. And I think probably the biggest thing here with Jeff Okudah was just him getting out there healthy and playing for the Lions. Like, that was the biggest thing because we haven't seen very much of this player. 2020, we saw him a little bit in his rookie season. We saw him for 3 quarters in his second year, which was unfortunate because I was so excited coming into that year for that player because I thought he was just balling out in training camp camp, and then it was like, boom, he's done with an injury, and now it was that process of trying to recover rather than just working, and he was trying to recover all offseason, and it was a process through the season. There were some ups, there were some downs, but that was the biggest thing to me, was athletically seeing Jeff look like himself. To me, he looked like himself coming out of the draft. Like, the explosiveness was there, the hips were there, the feet, everything was there that you saw with him coming out that got a lot of people excited. All of those tools were there as a man press type of cornerback. So that was probably the biggest thing, is to see that recovery and then come back. He missed some time this year, had some, sickness, things like that. But for the most part, that was probably the most optimistic thing to take away from Jeff's season this year, is that he was back to himself. He improved through the year, and now we're looking going forward saying, man, this guy could take off. And I get that vibe that this guy could take off very quickly. And people will be like, whoa, where did that come from? And I would not be shocked. I would not be shocked whatsoever. So some of my notes that I took away, as you can see on the right, athleticism, as I just touched on, the hips, the feet, like, he does this at a level that, I think I said it last year, that most smaller cornerbacks do. But with his size, it's kind of rare. He has the feet, the transition ability to open up his hips from a press position. I think for him, there are little things. Like, there were some tough games in there. You had Carolina, right, where it wasn't maybe as much as coverage as it was a couple missed tackles. One on the sideline. There was another missed tackle, squeeze and contain, that led to a big play. They started to mix in kind of Mike Hughes with him. There was the Jets game where he was in cover 4 and he let the guy get over top and pick up a big completion before the half. So there were things like that. There was also some good. There were games like the Dallas Cowboys where I thought he was just on fire, coverage and playing the run. He came out with a different mentality. We all remember that. Thought he played really well against Chicago, even though they don't throw it a ton. Minnesota, I thought he held his own, even with getting the help in the first game, but I thought he held his own in that game. So there were some ups, there were some downs for sure, but athletically you could see that he was the healthy player that we were hoping for. On top of that, it feels like it's just a lot of little things with him. Like, you see, like, oh, that looked good, and then he can get beat on kind of the same type of look, but it just feels like the little things with him technically, whether it's in a press situation. We know it's all the little things in the NFL, man. Here he's going to try to stab. He kind of opens himself up a little bit, unable to come to balance here in his base, and when he's pushed off, he's separated from, gives up the inside, but then he come back with the slant this time, and that inside hand, which he uses so well, gets connection, allows him to open himself back up. Different releases. This time he's releasing, trying to get him on his heels, but he allows himself to open back up. He has the long speed that you're looking for. He has the quickness that you're looking for. Open up, squeeze routes to the sideline, and just take away the big plays. And that's one big thing I will point out real quick for the cornerback position. It's tough, but that's where the numbers are. Like, the numbers aren't there when it's, okay, hey, the guy, he had good coverage on this play, that play, and this play. None of those numbers show up, especially on the basic stats. Where they show up is when the guy is finally targeted. So it can be great coverage, and all of a sudden maybe you fall down, guy gets a catch, and now it's like, well, that guy can't cover. Well, it's just like, that's the position of cornerback, man. You have to be opportunistic, usually get interceptions to lower that pass rating, like Amani last season, and at the same time, you know you're going to give up plays. That's just the nature of it. What rate can I get that play out of him where he's in a good spot defensively? Because then we're just kind of playing the odds of it, because it's not always going to be that. You're kind of playing the odds at that point. And then on top of that, can he be a playmaker on the ball? And it's tough in a defense that plays that much man coverage, but can he make plays at the catch point? And that's one thing, specifically for Jeff Okudah. I still think he's working in that area. Not to say that there wasn't good this year, and there's a couple times where it's like, okay, maybe he got pushed down on that one, but the catch point is still a work in progress for sure. Here he is against Washington in off coverage at the bottom here. Also, note Mike Hughes on this play, keeping his eyes on the quarterback, and as soon as Wentz lets this thing go, he's jumping over there to get over top just in case. But that ability to sink out of that half turn and then cut off this route is the kind of movement skills that Jeff does have. Was against DK Metcalf, where he was in a great position, and all of a sudden then he's just beat at the catch point, right? That thing is still a work in progress, him making plays there, deflecting passes, getting his head around to the football, and sometimes when he does get his head around, he loses the guy in his blind spot, so it's things like that. It always feels like a lot of the little things here with Okudah. Like this, looks like he's leaning a little bit outside leverage. He's going to try to get up on his toes. And you're going to see with that false step, he's going to shoot his hands, get some connection. And he's able to squeeze off, get in the pocket of this route, and shut it off. But on this next play you're going to see, looks like he's leaning a little bit again outside leverage. And receiver then is going to release that direction and then break back inside. Here he's unable to get hands on the receiver. And at this point, you're going to see him pop up just a tad. And then he's unable to get into the hip right there. And now now he loses step. Plus, you can see he keeps peeking back, which I don't know if I love that either. He feels like he's in a position there, but it's just like maybe close that distance just a little bit sooner. One thing you have to like about Jeff is he always tries to stay square. Here with that hesitation release, then opens up to the outside. You can see him get that inside hand on the shoulder there, but he doesn't get much push or slow down the route. So he kind of opens up into a sprint, trying to get on top of this one. But then that leads to kind of weird finding the ball there. If anything, you know, he wanted to push off. I understand. But going down on this play, this one's a little bit different again. The slot just looks like that one step and go. And on this play, you can see he's late with his hands, very patient with his feet there, gets caught in trail. And I like how he sticks with it and finds the ball late, but it's just at the same time where this ball placement was, that was just going to be difficult to make a play on this one. But he ripped it out, so he did finish the play, which I love. Like, I think the small things at the catch point pop up. You also have, like I said, in press. Like, one thing I loved about this dude coming out is I just felt like he was very technically sound, but so are the receivers in this league. And he's getting a lot of the top guys, and when you're getting that, man, you get the Metcalfs, you get the Garrett Wilsons, and you get these dudes that are extremely technical as well. And it's like the littlest movement throws you off, and then it's like, do you have the ability to recover? And while I think he does have that ability, sometimes you just get beat. Like here on DK Metcalf, you see Okudah playing some outside leverage on this play, and as DK releases that way, Okudah tries to stick on top of this route, and then DK just kind of gives you that little show that he's going to take off. All of a sudden, Okudah kind of breaks open. That hand that he's using, that inside hand, it's slapped down by DK, and all of a sudden now he's forced to open back up, but that's the step that DK needs for a guy that runs a 4.33. That's all he needs. And it's a really good route. You overcommit, you lose some of that patience. I think at times, press, and on top of the route, just a little bit impatient, squeezing on top, getting on top, you know, losing a quick hitch or whatever it may be to a Justin Jefferson. And I think he did improve upon this in the year, you know, but when you get these wider releases and the guys that he just gets a little bit too far on top, and then they're able to hit him with these quick curl routes, trying to protect the sideline, squeeze it off at the top, and then they hit him with this. And this is where you get Jeff on a slower receiver like N'Keal Harry. Definitely better at staying in phase with these kind of guys. It's the small little steps that he can use. And in this one, you notice he never really takes off in sprints, right? He's able to stay at kind of that jog pace because he's not threatened over top, and it helps him break down at the top of this route. This is something that seemed to dial back since his rookie season, but it's just flat out getting beat over the top, and with that, he's unable to get his hands on that receiver again. Guys like Jefferson that could kind of lean around it, that gave him some issues, but in this case, he gets behind and starts to grab, and then, of course, you get that flag, and maybe that wasn't necessary, but he did. Maybe it was necessary to not give up at least a big play. Crossers, I have to point this out because I just feel like you saw this a lot. Late on crossers, some of them not on him, but other times it was just like a little bit late to kind of click and go, try to cut off a crossing route. There was some good ones. There was a breakup that he had on Metcalf. The ball probably just came out a little bit late here, but there's also times where he's looking back for the football, maybe slowing himself down. Just very inconsistent play when teams run crossers and man coverage against him. And then communication is something I have to bring up because this is something I noted a lot during the season. Red zone, we saw that. Sometimes he would come off and Monty would come in, but just in general, like there was a lot of times where you didn't always see communication between him and a teammate before the snap and also on the fly. With that being said, I'm not saying that's all on him every time, but there's this like a communication for sure. I think as a whole needs to get better for the secondary, but for him, that's something I definitely noted many times throughout the season and honestly rewatching it back. But I think it's just the patience, the confidence in himself that needs to continue to be built. Like guys like Jerry, I don't question the dude's confidence. I mean, it's just like the last play didn't happen. He gets beat, he's like, okay, it doesn't matter, I'm back to it. He's just like crazy confident, which I think you need to have. It's like spooky confidence, you know. I think that's what you have to have as a cornerback because you're going to get beat, but at the same time, it's like, nah, I locked that dude up. Even if you didn't, you're like, I locked that dude up. That's why he didn't catch that. Like, you have to have that mentality, and I think Okudah's working to that, but also just the patience in general in coverage, not panicking when he gets himself in a bad spot. But I love the fact that he can change up styles. He has safety up over the top. He can shift it up a little bit. I think another thing, talking about relying on hands as a press corner, he loves to use his inside hand, which he does really well. But at the same time, you have guys like Justin Jefferson who kind of have that lean to him, and he like avoids the press, missing that jam attempt. Can you still stick in his hip? And sometimes he gets a little bit in trail in those spots. So for me, though, my biggest takeaway for Jeff Okudah going forward, and this is kind of my thought, is I look at him, I was honestly more excited about Jeff after rewatching his games rather than after the season just ended. I look at Jeff and say, man, I think this guy is a starting outside corner. I think that's what he's going to be. I think he's going to be a starting outside corner. And honestly, last year he was a rotational outside corner. You think when Mike Hughes rotated in, he was pretty much rotating in for Jeff, not for Jerry. To me, Jeff Okudah is a starting outside corner, and I would not be shocked, man, if it just was like, hey, out of nowhere next season, it's like, boom, this guy takes off. And that ties you into the fifth-year option, whether or not you want to pick that off. And pick that up, and I think that goes into a lot of things. Your mindset heading into this offseason, who you pick up, of course, what does the draft look like? Because, that's a good amount of money to guarantee yourself for that fifth year for Jeff. I mean, I look at it as if the Lions come in this offseason, they go get a premium multi-year deal to a cornerback that they're saying this guy can be a number one for us in free agency. I think it's difficult to pick up that fifth-year option because now you're putting big money at two cornerbacks, pretty big money, not crazy, but pretty big money at two cornerbacks, and at that point, you're maybe not believing that he can be that number one. I think Jeff is a starting outside cornerback. Was he a number one last year? No, he was not. Can he become that? I think so, but I think based on what we saw last year, he was not a number one cornerback for us. I think that's just the truth of it, but I think he can become that. It's just, I would love to see where he was now if he was healthy, but it just feels like he's just kind of almost in his rookie season. Like, it feels like a second year. It's weird. I'm cool with either way. If the Lions want to pick up that fifth-year option, I wouldn't have a problem with it. I'm very excited even after watching this year about this dude and the step that he took this year, and I think he's going to continue to take. Playmaking is probably the biggest thing for me with him that needs to improve. But at the same time there, if you don't want to pick it up because you go give a big-name free agent some money, I also understand that because usually you don't have like two very expensive cornerbacks on the outside. Let's continue down. Let's go on to that man, Jerry Jacobs. Goodness, his numbers are pretty outstanding. I think he has the best cornerback numbers for anybody on this list. You could see the 53% completion percentage allowed, 11.2 yards to completion, only one touchdown, which is something he said that was his goal, don't give up a touchdown, 70 passer rating, like SIS 19 of 34. He did have 4 PIs called against him. He had a couple of more flags I feel like than he had last season. I mean, they got him a few times, and that's one thing, like, he can kind of, in a subtle way, be very physical throughout a route, but sometimes it can get him in trouble beyond 5 yards. But for the most part, he's pretty good at actually hiding that. Regardless, though, this was another solid season for Jerry. Now, I wouldn't say like he took this massive step. He did get his first interception, which was awesome, but I think it was just kind of picking up where he left off from last year. And the way that I look at Jerry as a whole, real quick, I look at him as the guy you can win a Super Bowl. You can win the whole thing with him as your number 2 if he was in that position. But I think as of you look at him as ideally probably like your number 3 outside corner. I think that's ideally what you look at him as. I think he may have a little bit of a ceiling in certain areas, limited in certain spots. But I think you could win the whole thing with this guy, with a really legit number 1 on the opposite side. Him getting matched up with your number 2. I think you could win the whole thing with this guy. He could be a starter on that team. You also start to get into the slot talk. Could he be a slot? I don't know. We'll talk about that in a second here, but let's take a look at some of my notes. Patience, confidence. Probably the biggest thing that oozes out as soon as you watch Jerry. He plays patiently, but also with extreme confidence. Like, that's the biggest thing to me, man. Nothing sticks with him. He's right back to it. It's like he feels like he's the best dude out there, which I think is awesome for a cornerback, man. He just has that kind of mindset when he plays. The perfect mentality for a cornerback. On top of that, physical. We know he's extremely physical, and this comes in a lot of different ways. Run support, the way that he can jump screens. He just has kind of a knack for doing that, but also at the same time, just physical in coverage. He's physical in the first 5 yards. He's physical throughout a route, for being honest. He's physical at the catch point. He's just a physical cornerback that likes to talk to receivers, and I'm here for it. Squeezing routes. I think it's one of his best traits. Out again, getting called for a flag. Now, there is something to this, as he has to be in the hip of the receiver to squeeze the route, of course, for man coverage. When he gets himself in the trail, it's going to be difficult to squeeze the route, but he does that well, and I think a big thing that ties into that is his body control, and this shows up in zone and man. Shows up in zone a lot from off coverage because he can kind of break down the top of route and then dive down. I don't think he has elite quickness, but he has extremely good body control, whether that's at the catch point or also in terms of at the top of the route. He has very good body control, so I think that ties into his ability to squeeze routes really well. He can maintain without winning off the press, and that's one thing. Like, he doesn't have the best length. He's a little bit undersized, a little bit more of a stocky corner, but what's a huge part of that is going back to the confidence and the patience that he plays with. At the same time, if he doesn't win with his hands off the line, he can still stick with you. Like, he can completely whiff and still stick with the receiver, which you saw multiple times rewatching it back. He would completely whiff on a jam, but still not overset his feet, not get impatient with his feet and lunge, and then be in a position where he can't recover, because I don't think he has elite quickness or that recovery burst. I think he's faster than it looks. I mean, this guy did say he ran like a 4.3 something, I think, coming out. I don't know he actually ran that. But the point is, I did see against N'Keal Harry him completely undercut a route, which was like, dang, there was some speed there. I know Harry's not that fast. But the point is, I don't think he has that elite quick makeup and burst. That's why I put makeup speed. It's in the wrong spot there. And you see that. I think too often you get him in a position where he's in trail off the line, which is probably one of the biggest issues. But at the same time, if he misses with this press, he's not reliant on his hands in that spot. Now, he can get a little handsy in terms of squeezing routes, things like that. Again, in trail, you see that. I think too often he gets himself into that position where he's behind on a receiver. Change of direction could get him into the issues. Saw it against Stephon Gilmore. Guys like that could kind of shake him at the top of the route. Foot quickness, that's probably one of the biggest questions that I have for him moving the slot. I know he has the physicality to press off the line. I know he has that. I know he can open both ways, and I know that he can play the run. Probably one of your biggest questions there is not the patience. It's probably whether or not he has the foot quickness to do it. One of my questions for sure, grabs to the catch point. It's another thing that you kind of notice. He's gotten called for this. I think it was actually against Buffalo where he got called for a pass interference, and it was on the third down where he kind of grabs and pulls and reaches out. He's very subtle with it. He's very subtle with his little grabs that he uses, and I think it's great, because receivers do the same thing. They use little push off, top route, all these things. He doesn't have the quickest transition, but it's very cool, calm, and collected. Sometimes he lets guys get over top. He doesn't panic though when guys get over top. He loses them in his blind spot. He doesn't panic. He had one against the Vikings where he ended up tracking it down, breaking it up. I think he's very calm at the catch point, which is one of the things that I love as well. He gets a lot of passes broken up. Very calm at the catch point. Does not panic. When those eyes get wide, he does not panic at the catch point with that trail or in a good position. And at the same time, he had his first interception this year, which was fantastic. So yeah, to me, I look at Jerry and I look at it from that sense. I think, man, if this guy has to plug in and be your starter, that's great. You look at it and say that ideally he's probably like your number 3 or something like that, like your 3 outside corner, which is fine. And then if it's like, okay, this guy's not playing well, there's an injury, whatever it may be, he can be your number 2. I think that's kind of ideally what you're looking at it as. I think that's ideally, and I think maybe he's a little bit limited in terms of his ceiling, but at the same time, you just know what you're going to get. And that's probably the best thing about Jerry is you just know what he is. You know what he's going to give you. It just feels like that when you watch him out there against the run and in coverage. You just know what he's going to bring to the table. Let's start off here with Mike Hughes. I think Mike Hughes is one of the most interesting situations for the Lions currently on this roster because of the fact that he is a free agent and also his role this past year. So Mike Hughes, as we know, he was a slot cornerback. He played at wide cornerback for us this past season. But the point is that he moved around a lot for us, right? He came into the year, I wasn't sure what he was going to be. I thought he was going to play slot coming into the season, right? We did a video about that, and turns out he did come in playing slot. And then midway through the season, from week 5, after week 5, 6, 7, and 8, did not play defensively. Then you had to move to outside cornerback. Will kicked into the slot. He started to rotate there with Jeff Okudah, and that was kind of the weird role that he has. So I don't really know how the Lions feel about this guy. I just don't know. I'm very curious to see what they do with this. The statistics are not fantastic when you look at them. 73% completion percentage, 126 passer rating. But as I just touched on, that's something that stands out to me with Mike Hughes is that's where those stats come from, right? You can have great coverage for many plays, but it's the one that's at the catch point where you don't make the play, and then all of a sudden those numbers look bad. Like, you could be in great positions. You could force the quarterback to not throw the ball there because he's like, dude, that guy's covered. But it's the time that he's targeted that affects those stats. That's it. That's what affects those stats, is when you're targeted. Unfortunately, he hasn't been that playmaker at the catch point that he was kind of thought to be coming out of the draft. That just hasn't really been him. At least he wasn't this past season. As you can see, he only had the one pass defended, and I believe that was against Buffalo where he had a broken up pass, which was fantastic, by the way. It was a great broken up pass. I got a pretty good amount of notes here. I've tried to fly through them. We know about his quick feet, his transition quickness. He does it with ease. Like, it's with ease, man. He gets himself in a bad spot. His ability to just open up the complete opposite direction, make a 180 it's unreal. Now, it seems like Aaron Glenn really coaches these guys up in that half-turn position to just flip around, right? Don't try to open up and turn. And again, that's where you go back to Okudah and you say, man, it just looks like he needs a little more time because he kind of opens up weird sometimes at the catch point, like backwards. He gets himself in a weird spot. But Mike Hughes, like, it's so natural with him. His change of direction, his movement skills is so natural with him from that sense. Stepped up versus the run. Got to give him credit there. Like, he didn't just play the run. You can see the PFF grade. He stepped up versus the run, and that was in multiple games. I think Minnesota comes to mind immediately. This dude played the run. He played his butt off there. Also, in the open field, he had the 4 missed tackles, but at the same time, man, he just limits yards after the catch in terms of he doesn't have much leakage. Goes low. He knows how he wins attacking screens. Now, he's a guy that has a knack for sensing these. He has a sense of him just like Jerry. Like, there were times where Jerry, it's just like he kind of knew that was coming. And I think back to Jerry, a quick point on him, I forgot to make it, against screens that I love is that he also understands the coverage that he's in. Meaning, like, if we're in cover 2 and I have the flat on the outside here, I could be more aggressive. So I'm in this position, I'm going to go jump on that screen that I think's coming. He did the same thing to a jet against Green Bay. I'm in this coverage, so I'm willing to do that because I know what position I'm in. One thing I like about Mike is that he can evade blockers. Like, he, again, understands how he wins. He does a real nice job of evading guys in open space, blockers trying to pick him up. He does a really good job, and between the box, too. Like, he has that little slither to him to make plays in the backfield. Also, probably one of my favorite plays from Mike was the blitz against the Vikings, where he literally ran over Dalvin Cook and hit the quarterback. I mean, that was it for me. I don't think he's a better blitzer than Will Harris, but that was the one to me. It was like, okay, that was pretty awesome. And then calm and confident off coverage. One of my favorite parts of his game is that if you get him in off coverage, not pressed up in man, but off coverage, he plays it like with no concerns whatsoever. A lot of ground that you have to cover, he does not panic at all. He communicates really well. He sees the entire field. He's so calm in an off-coverage situation, whether that's backed up playing the sticks or playing 6 yards off. He's very calm in those environments. He's going to make the play in open space. Now, to that, I think you get him like 5-6 yards off the ball, and then all of a sudden you ask him to break down. He can break a little bit high, and then all of a sudden it kind of slows down the dive that he shows. Mike Hughes an off man protecting the sticks on this third down. They just run this little drag underneath. That's the quick click and close, and then the finish low. No leakage after this one, and he stopped him short. Breaking on the football, you get an extra step in there, a little extra bounce, which kind of slows him up a little bit, slows up some of that foot quickness and ability to jump underneath on routes. Top of the route, maybe his biggest issue, to be honest. At the top of the route, Mike Hughes, man, like, that's where he gets separated from. And it's just a lot. Physical receivers on the outside, yes. In the slot, sometimes that happens too, though. Just bigger receivers, he just gets separated from the top. He can be a great position, and then even if it's not a push-off, it's just like there's separation right there. He can be in a great position to give the catch, and I think that's a big reason for his numbers. Like, I'm watching him against Minnesota, and the first time, I'm like, man, this guy's playing his butt off. All of a sudden, he gives up 2 catches, or really just 1 at the end of the game. It's like, well, dang, that was a huge catch that he gave up. There was a play on Justin Jefferson, like, he's all over him. And then at the catch point, 2 times, just separated from him. And that's another part. Not only at the top of the route, also at the catch point, he doesn't have the length. And he doesn't make a lot of plays at the catch point. He didn't do that with Kansas City. It was one of my concerns with him, but he did have a good play against Buffalo, so we'll give him credit there. Too much depth in cover 2. Just a little thing that I kind of know. I think he gives too much cushion. Zone help, meaning like you got this with Will Harris. We'll talk about it. But I think that's another thing about him playing in the slot. We also have to remember, yes, he had played slot before, but with Minnesota, when he played slot, because we did video coming near, I thought his traits would transition him to slot. But at the same time, he hadn't really played the slot cornerback position, so it's different for him. It's definitely different than sticking on the outside. And we know he moved in the outside, and I thought he was way better on the outside, even though I don't think he played bad at the slot. But I think that is one thing, is that kind of that zone awareness, where my help is, when should I drop, when should I help, when should I squeeze a certain route. Like Will Harris, you kind of know what you're going to get there. Mike seems a little bit kind of scattered in that sense. We're also being in a position where he's giving up the flat in his zone, not really seeing the entire picture there from that spot, from the slot specifically we're talking about here. Back to really quickly to the top of the route point that I made. I think one thing that's key here is his hands, like utilizing your hands, especially within 5 yards. He needs to get his hands on the receiver first. Like a lot of receivers kind of use that little subtle like separate, boom, and that pushes him off, and then he gets a lot of separation. For him, he needs to get his hands on the receiver first. When he does that, he stalls it out, and then as on he can finish the route. But it's almost like the finishing aspect for him. Top of the route and catch point, which is the biggest issue, which stinks because that's really what matters, right? We need some playmakers in the back end, but for the most part, everything up to that, I usually love the way that he plays. Like, yeah, he gets beat, right? There was a whip route where he completely overcommitted. He jumped on top of it, and they broke him outside. They picked up like 17 yards, right? That happened. Love his athleticism as well and the way that he moves. Like, to me, I'm weird with Mike Hughes, man. When I see this dude play, I think about it. I said, man, I don't think you want to lose him. And I completely understand why the Lions tried Mike Hughes on the inside because of his movement skills. He's completely different. He doesn't use his hands really at all to win. He is completely mirror match with his feet. And if you watched him against the Bills, he basically shut down Gabe Davis in the entire game. He played really well against the Patriots when he stepped in. Zone coverage, man coverage on the outside, specifically here on a double move. Again, he doesn't utilize his hands as much. He is purely based on winning with his feet. Now, I think that leaves a lot of upside, but there's also possible limitations there as well. However, I would just love to stick this guy around, keep him around, and see what he can be on the outside. I think the upside is really high, especially with matchup differences that you're going to get. But at the same time, then I struggle with what is his role, because then you have to look at the entire picture, right? When you start talking about the entire picture, which we'll talk about in a second, where does he kind of fit into that? But I look at it and say, man, I don't think you want to lose Mike Hughes. Oh, here's Mike on a hesitation release against Watson. You're going to see those quick feet to open up the hips. Most guys on the outside aren't going to be able to match that. Now, he doesn't have the elite long speed or maybe the ability to squeeze and at the top of the route here, but he is in a good spot with his being in the hip of Christian Watson. I like him more on the outside, but I believe he can play in a slot. However, I don't know if that's a Will Harris kind of guy, or not Will Harris, an Aaron Glenn type of guy at slot, because he kind of got pushed out of that role. Will went inside, which I think fit him better than playing on the outside. Athletically, he could do it, and he could cover guys up. I think he's a much better man-covered slot corner than Will Harris. So that segues me into Will Harris, where we won't spend too much time on this one. You can see his stats on the left here, and he, again, transitioned to slot. His coverage grade is actually, I think, the highest on PFF of any of our guys. One of his biggest strengths to me is that communication, whether that's pre-snap, post-snap, on the fly, whatever. He does that extremely well. Now, to that, there isn't times where he wasn't in bad spots. Miami, getting beat in the flat multiple times, biting on the play action, beat into the flat, and that's a really tough spot, cover 3, but that happens, and it happened to him a few times. But he communicates extremely well, where you kind of know what's going to happen, and he adapts. Like, yes, there were times where he got beat this season, and there were multiple times where he got beat this season, but he usually doesn't let the same thing beat him twice. He takes it, and he just adapts to it. He squeezes routes in zone coverage really well underneath. He can force you off it very quickly. He understands kind of where everybody is on the field. Pre-snap, he communicates with everyone really well. You don't really have lapses there. I think he assumes. Like, there was a play against Minnesota for Mike Hughes where you kind of felt like he kind of assumed that there was going to be a switch, and there wasn't. Will Harris doesn't just completely assume. Like, he's going to tell you this is what we got to do, pre-snap or post-snap, but he's not going to just assume that's going to happen. But at the same time, you get a play like a Green Bay where he just naturally has the instinct to drop and get in coverage. It's just like, that's awesome. However, from slot, I think he's still limited. Now, he might be better in man coverage from slot than A.J. Parker was. I still think he's limited here. Foot quickness, some of those guys can separate with him. More complex underneath routes, whip routes, double moves underneath, things like that. That can give him problems. He does have adequate straight line speed. The transition isn't really the same. Biggest concern, I don't know how much of a playmaker he's going to be from this position on the ball at the catch point, but we know he's crazy physical. He'll hit. He plays with outstanding effort and pursuit. I think he's probably our best blitzer. And leverage, I point out leverage, that was an issue. I felt like understanding leverage in man coverage and also zone, getting himself in a bad spot in man, losing leverage, but also in the same time in zone, like not really feeling the leverage, like I need to stay on the outside here and then losing that. I think that's a position that he just needs work on. But when I look at it, man, like, again, Will's in the same boat. This is a safety that can cover tight ends. We know that. And by the way, back to Mike Hughes, I think that's one thing he needs to get more credit for. I know he's undersized, but he sticks with tight ends better than you would think. Like, Mike Hughes doesn't back down from the challenge. He's a strong dude, and at the line, he's going to get physical with you. It's just at the top of the route, he needs to find a way to win more often. He needs to find a way to get his hands on you first, because you're not going to dictate this. I'm going to dictate the route. He'll dictate it off the line. He needs to dictate it at the top of the route and win at the catch point. Will Harris, he can play tight ends, what he did in college. It's still moving around a lot for him, though. It is. And I think his best spot, I don't think he's going to go back to safety. I think on the outside, he's fine in a pinch, but that's not where you want him necessarily. He's fine in a pinch. I think he might even be better in zone coverage, honestly, playing on the outside. With that being said, I think slot is his best spot. And I think the big reason is Lions play a lot of off-man from slot, and at the same time they play some zone. Then Will Harris handles that pretty well. He just hasn't been the playmaker at the catch point. But I just think you kind of know what he is, what you're going to get. Yeah, he's going to mess up things, but he's going to adapt. He's going to learn from it. He's going to communicate. You're never going to have to wonder about that. So that's my thoughts on Will. Ani, you know what? Let's get to him in a second. I want to start off with Chase Lucas first, because I won't spend too much time here, but I'm so intrigued by this dude. And I had to go back. I had to rewatch this preseason stuff, and it's hard because there's no All-22. But man, this is purely based on preseason. I'm intrigued. I look at this and say I wouldn't be shocked if he's our starting slot next year. If that happens, I'm not going to be surprised. Trust me, I will not be. I might be, but I'm not going to be, because I don't think it's crazy to think that he starts at that position for us next season. Let's think about a couple things here for a second. Lions came in with Mike Hughes as a slot. Let's just get some numbers, some basic numbers. 40 time. Chase Lucas is faster, right? He has a faster 40 time. 10-yard split. Chase Lucas is also quicker. Who would have thought? He has a quicker 10-yard split than Mike Hughes. He has better length than Mike Hughes. He also had tons of experience coming out. Are you talking about a guy at 5-year experience at Arizona State? So he's a little bit older now. You can see his statistics. One thing that he really improved on by the time he came out, it's why he got teams like the Patriots interested, is because his breaking on the football, being better at angles, making plays on the ball, being more of a playmaker. He just hit on Will Harris, gave him so much credit for communication. You know who does that? Chase Lucas. Coming out of the draft, team captain, the best communicators. He's loud. He's kind of like the rock of a defense, and that's what he was there on the state. That's what he was at the camps. That's what he was noted for. So I look at Chase Lucas, and I love all those things. But then when you watch him in his preseason, it's like the role that you put him in, this could work. However, my biggest question, while it's not really a press question as much with Jerry, it's kind of the opposite, is his ability to press off the line from slot. If you put him in those spots, what will that look like? Strength-wise, he's much more of a lanky kind of corner that can play inside-outside, right? He could be an outside corner for the Lions, but he played all slot in the preseason. Now, I wouldn't be shocked that the vision was this guy might end up being our slot cornerback. Things that I love, his mirror pedal. This is huge from off coverage, for sure. But that ability to mirror a route, match your route, same thing from zone coverage, aligning yourself well with leverage, diving from off or zone coverage. He has that click and go, but also some route recognition and angles that he developed with a lot of experience at Arizona State, which led to that dropped interception he had in the first preseason game against Atlanta with the break on the ball. Is also the transition. It's a little bit stiff when you watch him. He plays a little high. He's a little bit more kind of high cut, but at the same time, he's a little bit stiff. He's definitely not as fluid to me as a Mike Hughes was, so it's different because you get those quick, double complex routes that could be an issue for him. It probably would be hidden a lot more on the outside, but at the same time, if he's playing off man, a little bit more off, not pressing up, but like 4 or 5 yards off, or playing zone from the slot position, I'm thinking it's going to hide some of that for him. And at the same time, while it's a little bit stiff in his transition, he can do it. It's a little bit stiff, but the complex routes could give him some issues there. And then the biggest question I would have is run support. What does that look like? And I know he helped against the run in college, so what does that look like? Because we really didn't see it. His blitzing ability, what does that look like? But the other stuff, I wouldn't be shocked if this guy starts at slot next year. I would not. And what's great about this is that he's in a situation because of his deal, you don't want to cut your draft picks. But if you had too many numbers and you're like, man, this guy won the role, he's not our slot, you could cut him. But he also does have flexibility to play inside, outside. This feels like the year, though, to me. Like, to me, the situation just makes sense. It makes sense that this could be the year for him to kind of show himself, like, I'm that dude. Because I don't know if Mike's coming back. I don't know if Will's coming back. I would assume at least one of them will come back. But he's going to have that opportunity now with a year to say, hey, look, if this is going to happen, it's going to happen. And I'm going to battle you for this spot. That leads you on to Amani. And this one's just, it's unfortunate, but I also need to say that I think, it's again, just to the point that I just made, Amani didn't have any interceptions this year. He didn't have those plays on the football in terms of interceptions that he had this past season. However, with Amani, you see his statistics on the left. They're not terrible. I mean, they're not terrible. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, though. The 106 pass rating, it's not terrible. He had the 1 pass interference called against him. I think that was against Green Bay. The PFF grades are terrible. But a couple things about Amani. First off, I don't think he was like completely horrendous. Like, this wasn't a situation where it's like this guy can't play at all. Like, I don't think it was that. It felt like a step back, and it was weird. Like, it looked weird at certain spots. Minnesota was obviously the biggest one. The multiple defensive flags that he had been called for, it was weird, right? We all saw it. Top of the route against the lean, right? When receivers ever lean in or lean out, he kind of just like, he almost like overexerted himself to go get contact and squeeze a route, grab, and then he get himself in a weird spot. His feet, he wouldn't stick on top of the route, so now he's in a trail, now he's grabbing. It was very weird. It was very grabby for some reason. Not trusting himself almost against some of those quicker receivers, which I get. He's not the quickest cornerback. He's not the most fluid change of direction guy where he's going to mirror and match you for multiple, breaks. And at the same time, off the press, he's a little bumpy. I feel weird saying that, but that's what it sounds like. A little bumpy in transition. It's a little bit more choppy than, other guys. A little bit more high cut, a little taller as a corner, but it's just not as smooth. Some of the recovery burst isn't necessarily there to me, which is why it's so important that if he doesn't win off the line, then he's in a bad spot immediately, and then you get a guy that grabs a little bit. With that being said, though, his length, we know that he has upside as a press corner, and there was definitely some good in there. But if he doesn't win, and I think he utilizes his hands a lot here, now you get him in a bad spot, and then he also doesn't have that same body control. Some of that's due to his build, likely, that a guy like Jerry Jacobs does, who's a lot lower to the ground, at the top of routes, zone, off coverage, things like that. So it was a tough year for him. He didn't have the playmaking. The cover 2 length, I still love that. I still love this dude in cover 2. I really do, because schematically there, while we rotate into that, that's not who we are, right? Aaron Glenn laid out what he wanted to be coming this year. Aggressive, physical at the line of scrimmage, press guys inside 5 yards. He laid out what he wanted to be. But that wasn't necessarily it. And I think he can do that really well. I think he really can. Goal to goal, he started to be kind of a guy for us. And I think a big part of that's his length. Communication needs to be on point there. But with his length, it's tight window throws. He's a tough guy to throw it against. You put Mike Hughes in the inside of goal to goal situation, it's not the same, right? Because Mike Hughes, obviously, you can just kind of throw it by him and he can be separated from. It's going to be hard to separate from that guy. And there's not a lot of room for a guy to open up and separate from Amani in that small space. He just kind of has to stick with guys. Usually there's not a lot of breaks. It's slants, it's crossers, that kind of thing. He thrives on bigger receivers. I just think it's just a better matchup for him. It's not to say he doesn't get beat versus them, because he does, but I think he thrives in those spots. But to me, the transitions just are a little rough. The biggest thing I take away with him here is I think he's definitely better than I think the kind of the perception was, and what we kind of hit him with during the season. I will say that. And I think there is a world where he gets brought back on a very cheap deal for another 1 year, but I think it's super unlikely. To me, I think it's just most likely that after this season, you kind of move on. I just think it's most likely, and someone may pay him because of what he did a year ago. And I feel like a team that's maybe just more heavy zone, that's willing to say, hey, press, because I think off coverage zone, it just looks rough. Like when you got him in those like 3rd and 20s and you had him playing off man, it was just like, that's a problem, because if the quarterback has any time and he hits him with a double move and he opens him up, it's just like he's going to separate from him. It's too much field for him to stick in his hip. He's not that. But he's a guy that can play behind you as a receiver, cover 3 where he has help and he doesn't have to squeeze the route at the top. He just feels like more of a different fit. That's the biggest takeaway I have. He just feels like a different fit for a different scheme than maybe what Glenn is going for here. And I hate that. I'm a big fan of the dude. He covered up some of those long balls on Christian Watson well. Feels like maybe his best fit stylistically is just with a different schematic scheme. And that's kind of the thoughts that I get from him. And you have the two guys that are, new additions now. You have Jaron Williams and you have Khalil Dorsey. Let's start off with Jaron Williams first. His numbers are fantastic, by the way. All right, 38% completion percentage, 46 pass rating. Does that mean that he's the best corner on our team? No, that's why the numbers are, But the point is, that was 2021. 2022 did not play, but he was on our special teams at the end of the season. He was on our practice squad. He was with Graham in 2021 as their defense coordinator, not Martindale, so it wasn't as man heavy. But with Jaron Williams, he played well when he stepped in. He played in at the end of the season in 2021. He first off played slot against the Chargers. Then he was kicked to the outside, Dallas, Philly, stuck on the inside. Then he had an injury, and that was it for the season. So he didn't play a lot of games, as you see there, but he played well when he did. And some of my main takeaways: extremely disciplined on the outside. He had a great football intelligence, and this showed up in a lot of areas: game awareness, situation, clock awareness, okay, just awareness in general, but also when I'm being blocked, attacking screens. Like he jumped a screen on one play, just shut it down, attacked, backed up, and then attacked again and completely made the guy whiff. It was like, what the heck was that? It was awesome. Body control. He's a very controlled cornerback. He seemed to do pretty well from off coverage as well. But with that being said, I didn't see that quick twitch and explosiveness necessarily. I thought this is a UDFA out of Albany. I think it's intriguing, though, because we brought in a couple guys here, similar height, similar weight, that again could compete for slot. I think there's going to be a legit competition for slot this season. That's why I think Chase could end up being that for us. I think he's going to compete right for that with us as well. But him at outside corner is interesting because I think he's a very heady corner. Finally, you have Khalil Dorsey. Won't spend too much time here. This is a guy, though, that I had to go watch his 2022 preseason once again, this time with the New York Giants. And I think this one's very interesting because of that alone. We know preseason can be a little bit more vanilla, but the point is that coverage is coverage. And when you take a look at a team like the Giants, Wink Martindale was their defensive coordinator this past season. And as we said, what we know with him is that he's heavy blitz and heavy man coverage. He blitzes more than anybody else in the league, first again this past season. And if any team plays as much or more man than us, it's him and those New York Giants. So schematically, it makes sense. A smaller cornerback with more of a slot cornerback type of build, but that's what he played in the preseason with the New York Giants. He missed the entire 2021 season with an injury. 2020, he was originally with the Baltimore Ravens, but I watched him in this preseason. The first matchup you saw against the Patriots, you saw him against Lil Jordan Humphrey, who's a big slot. I mean, he's a guy that lined up there, but he's huge. He's 6'4", 225, but he's not that fast because he was sticking with him. He had no problem with that, but he was handling his own. He showed the acceleration, he showed the burst, the recovery ability, especially against that matchup, the transition from the side shuffle to back pedal, which I think is very important when you talk about some more of the off man that you play from that position when you're giving a little bit more cushion off the line. You're not getting up and pressing somebody. I think that's important. He also blitzed a ton. So again, we just talked about blitzing. He was used to blitz a ton, and I'm watching like, why is this happening? Oh yeah, that's their defensive coordinator. And I bring that up because we like to blitz, and we like to blitz our slots. I mean, if you watched last season, we did that a ton. We would blitz our slot cornerback, and then we drop off a defensive lineman. We did that a ton last season against the Bears, really against everybody. So he also has that, and he looked pretty good. I mean, he looked pretty good in terms of the angles that he was taking. He got to the quarterback really quickly. He limited the time that it took to get there. His fluidity, movement in zone coverage underneath, of course. Not necessarily maybe the awareness as much as just the fluidity and his movement skills to cut off routes underneath. Just be in a position where he could just jump into passing lanes. Run support, block shedding, kind of my biggest questions there. One, because I didn't see it a ton, and two, I really didn't see him block shed. His size is obviously something that plays into it. You have to know how you win. At very least, you have to be able to set leverage, set contain, right? Get on the outside shoulder, those kind of things. How quick do you react to the run? Like, those things I'm not completely sure on. I didn't see a ton of that for him, so that would be one question, specifically block shedding with his size, or at least positioning himself well. Zone awareness is probably my biggest question that I noted in zone coverage. Letting things get to the outside, letting things get behind him, kind of losing him. Double moves even underneath zone coverage, like quick, complex routes underneath. Like, zone awareness would probably be my biggest question for Khalil Dorsey, but the skill set makes sense. And he also has very short arms, so that's one thing to also note. Okay, I know he's shorter, but he only has 30-inch arms, which in comparison to some of our other guys like Chase Lucas, who has some arm length, he doesn't have very long arms. So he is definitely a slot. He is definitely a slot corner that has good movement skills, quick twitch, all of those things that you like. And I think he's also one of those guys that are also in the race for competing for that slot cornerback position. Also, he also played special teams, and what I saw him play special teams in was on the punt return team, blocking the Gunners, playing on the end. So just to throw that in there. All right, so what is the Detroit Lions need level at the cornerback position? How many times have I changed my shirt in this video? I'm kidding, it's a different day. What is the Lions cornerback need level at this position? So I think the way that I look at it, at the beginning, the need level for the Lions is they need to go out this offseason and look for a starting outside cornerback, a guy that they believe can start on the outside this upcoming season, okay? That's what I think you have to look for, and I think there's different ways to go about that, like we're going to discuss, whether that's free agency, trade, or the draft. But I think the Lions are in a very interesting situation here, and they have an opportunity to really be in a good spot after this offseason. Here's why I say that. Okay, you look at teams around the league. If you have, the Saints, the Rams, those two teams we have connections with, so I'm going to use those two. But if you have a cornerback that's a pure number one, he's one of the best in the league, your number two cornerback can be moved around a little bit more. Usually you want to have pretty legit pass rush as well. We know teams like the Saints and the Rams more so, but they build through the pass rush first, which, if you look at the Lions roster, that's what they've done, and that's where Brad Holmes is going with this, and I don't expect that to stop. $35 million for 2023 is set for just the edge rusher position alone, which is 8th in the NFL. Now, D-line, not very much. We also don't have a lot of guys under contract there. I look at a guy like Michael Brockers, though, and I don't anticipate that, he's going to be back on the team. He'll probably be moved. You save $10 million there. Then you have guys like Aleem and Levi, but we don't know what Levi is. So I still think you need to add another DT. We're going to talk about that, in a later video. But the point is that that's how Brad Holmes is going about this. I don't expect that to stop it. When you have a legit pass rush and defensive front, your number two cornerback sometimes doesn't have to be like that premium dog that you have on the opposite side. And teams like the Rams and the Saints have kind of done that, mixed in different players. I'll use the Saints for an example here. In 2017, Ken Crawley was their number two cornerback. 2018-19, it was Eli Apple as their number two cornerback. Neither of those, both of those years, his cap hit was extremely low. Now, Lattimore was still on his rookie deal, and we know the Saints had financial issues, salary cap issues, so that's part of it. Then in 2020, at the end of 2019, they bring in Janoris Jenkins, Jack Rabbit Jenkins, and it's like, all right, this is great. And they had this legitimate number two, and he balled out in 2020 for him. 4 picks, 15 pass defense. He was outstanding. They found their number two, but then they had to cut him for cap relief. And I think the Lions are going to be in a much better financial situation because they do have flexibility, like with their quarterback, things like that. But the point is they had to cut him for cap relief in 2020. Still, as you see, you have different pieces moving around. Then in 2021 and now 2022, now you're getting the rookies into the mix. 2021, third round, you draft Paulson Adebo of Stanford. Then in 2022, you draft Alontae Taylor, the cornerback or defensive back out of Tennessee. So now you're starting to get the rookies into the mix. Why? Marshawn Lattimore's contract is starting to kind of take off a little bit because you had the 5th-year option in there, 2022, which is less than what the 5th-year option would be upcoming, but I guess it's kind of the same in terms of value. And then you're going to have his contract kind of take off in terms of the cap number. So now you're kind of piecing in some rookies and things like that to try to find that number two cornerback position, which makes tons of sense. Because again, they build through the defensive front, so it's going to be difficult to pay 2 premium outside cornerbacks. I think that's kind of the build that the Lions are going for, is that they're building through the front, which I'm completely fine with. And like I said, I think if you had a Lattimore or Ramsey, and you had that, Jerry Jacobs, as I said earlier in this video, I think you could win the whole thing with him as your number two cornerback. But do you have that at number one? That takes the best receiver, and he's that. Is he Jair Alexander? I don't think he is right now. That's not Jeff Okudah right now. I mean, I think you still make the case Jerry Jacobs was better than Jeff Okudah last season, but I think he can become that for the Lions. But where the Lions are in a real interesting spot here is, like the LA Rams as well, the Rams who never have first-round picks, and they're still kind of piecing it together. Ramsey's contract is taking off, and that's why the whole trade idea, I think, is very unlikely just because of the numbers alone. Like, his cap hit is insanely high. It's well over $20 million going forward. But the Rams, they just traded for Troy Hill back to the Rams to be their number 2 cornerback, 31-year-old cornerback. So they're kind of doing something similar, and they've had a lot of moving pieces out there as well. We know last year they had Darius Williams and winning the Super Bowl with that guy. But for the Lions, they're in an interesting position because they have the 5th-year option potential with Jeff Okudah, which, like I said, would be a little over $11 million, which won't be crazy depending on where the salary cap goes. So you're going to have that coming up just like you did with Marshawn Lattimore. But then you also have 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. You have good draft capital. We can throw that on the screen. You have good draft capital. I'm not saying it has to be round 1, but round 1, usually the idea is a first-round pick. He's going to come in and start contribute year 1. That's the idea of drafting a first-round pick, really outside of it being a quarterback or, in our situation, taking Jameson Williams just because of the fact that Jameson Williams was dealing with an injury, but he could have went super high if that wasn't the case. So you get those kind of one-offs, but that's usually how you view a first-round pick. That's what he's going to be. And the Lions are in a position, because I'm not going into specific names here, but with a 6th and an 18th pick, that they could potentially look to go that route because the Rams didn't have those draft picks, right? The Saints, they didn't have the financial situation. The Lions have an opportunity to potentially, if they wanted to, go that direction, take a first-round corner wherever that is. Even if it's at the 6th pick, the cap hit's only $5.4 million. If it was the 18th pick, his projected cap hit for this year is only $2.8 million. And then we know after that, it gets very cheap. You start to, kind of jump off. Everything's like in the million range to, hundreds of thousands once you get towards the end of the draft. So it drops off big time once you get into round 2. But you also get that 5th-year option with that. The Lions have an opportunity, if they wanted to go that direction, okay? Now, we don't know what Jeff Okudah is going to be or what he's going to turn into. But if he does turn into a number 1 potential type of cornerback, that would be amazing. I look at him now as he can be a starting outside cornerback for you, and there's always the projection side of this business. That's what they all have to do. They have to scout the team. What is our team? And then you have to decide what do we need based on that. And the way I see it is Jeff Okudah, I'm buying in that he's a starting outside cornerback next year, and that you could win with Jerry as a starting outside cornerback as well. I just think maybe he's has a little bit more of a ceiling to him. But if we knew Jeff was that dog number 1, and at that point I could go with, hey, we don't maybe need to even draft a cornerback that high. They have 2 first-round picks at a premium position, which the Rams never had. They have an opportunity potentially to go add a top cornerback to this mix without it affecting the cap hit too much, because they'd still have another first-round pick, whether that's 6 or at 18. I assume the other one's probably going to go to defensive tackle, because now basically Brad put out there it's not going to go to quarterback, which is great because you have some holes that you still need to fill, specifically on the defense side of the ball, and one of those could be finding that outside corner. And because you have a guy like Jerry Jacobs, and honestly Jeff Okudah, but because you have a guy like that, and if you bring a Mike Hughes back, I think he gives you flexibility, because now you also know that, hey, this guy doesn't work out or he's not ready, Jerry Jacobs can start for me. He can hold that down. We can win with Jeff and Jerry on the outside, but this guy could be that number 1 for us, right? Your first round pick, this guy could be the top guy for us, right? That could happen. That's what happened with Lattimore. That's what happened with Ramsey. They have that because their edge rusher position is taken care of. Their safety position is pretty taken care of. I mean, they'll have to add a couple things there, but under contract, Tracy's under contract. His cap, it goes up like $14 million this year. You have Kirby Joseph, Iffy under contract. So you still got those 3, right? So that's pretty much taken care of. Linebacker, you're probably going to have to bring back Duracell. I'd expect they would, but they have Malcolm and Derek Barnes under contract. But it's that they have that opportunity to address it like that. Now, there's the other direction, I think, as well, which is going to sign a free agent. It's tough to do this, and I think, obviously, there's a scheme that has to work. Same thing with the draft pick, because I'm not going to specific names here, but you have to look for a guy that's kind of man-heavy. And I think for the Lions, if you're going the draft pick way, I think you want to look for some of the tools there. A lot of man type of cornerbacks that we've brought in with Brad Holmes, which makes sense because that's what we do, whether that's been the Jerry Jacobs, whether that's been the Mike Hughes, and kind of the body type, a little bit shorter but quicker, a good press, all of those things. They stay in your hip. They don't allow much separation. We have those types of corners, so you're going to have to add that again, I believe, because I don't think this idea of how Glenn wants to play this is going to change. He laid that out coming into the year. Of course, the other route you could look is that free agency market if there's a guy out there. Now, I think what's interesting about this, I think that kind of would affect potentially that 5th-year option, whether or not you want to pick it up. I mean, you still could. Maybe it doesn't affect it a ton, but it does depend on kind of where that salary cap hits. I know it's looking a year about for 2024 because Jeff is then going to be locked into over $11 million that season, and if you go sign a guy that's 27 years old for 3 to 4 years and that kind of big deal for a cornerback, then at that point, that second year under his deal, you want to kind of keep an eye on that because you want to at least have flexibility when that comes around because you're not going to have it with Jeff, and you could have two very expensive cornerbacks out there. But you could do it because if you're not sure that Jeff is that number one, you don't want to pick up that fifth-year option because there's that risk to it, then that makes sense. You could go that direction. I don't really get the sense the Lions will do that, but when they went and traded for Jalen, it was just like a guy of that caliber with that type of cap, it doesn't come around. You go free agency, you're paying a lot of money for a guy. If he's that dude and he's young enough where he could be there 3 to 4 years, you're paying a ton of money. With Jalen, his cap it was so low because he was still like under a rookie deal that it was basically just give up draft picks and you're getting a rookie deal player that's one of the best in football. Like, that's unreal. That doesn't come available. So if that came available, I would assume Brad Holmes might jump on it. And then you go back to the trade option, which is, I always bring up Gilmore, but I think it's a great example. The issue, again, with him would be his cap number. You'd have to probably adjust some money there with his base salary if you brought a guy like that in, because then, again, his cap number is $11 million. But he only has 1 year left on his deal, and you probably could make it financially work for next season. Or then after that year, because I think next year the Lions looking at it saying, man, we can go win the whole thing. I think that's the mindset. Why not? Tie that with Jeff Okudah, Jerry Jacobs. Now we can go back in the draft, and it doesn't have to be a round 1 pick, all right? I mean, it still could be. Doesn't have to be. I'm not saying it has to be the other scenario either. It could be a 3rd round pick, could be a 4th round pick, whatever. And then you could bring that guy in, and maybe by the time that Stephon Gilmore's out, then that guy could step in. Plus, I think there's just a natural benefit of this cornerback unit really hasn't had that kind of guy. They had Trufant for a minute, but a really legitimate, like, top dog corner that may not be that right now anymore. Stephon Gilmore's still a dog, by the way. But you get that guy to a unit that could really use it with a lot of young pieces that hasn't really had that. Right, the D-line had Brockers. The linebacker position has Duracell. The safety position necessarily has that, but Tracy's probably pretty close because he just got signed to as an extension. But the cornerback position hasn't really had that. We know how technical that is, and it could help out a lot of the young guys just for that one season, even if it's not the long-term outlook, and that would be where the draft pick comes in. But he would be able to also learn under that guy. So I think in general, you just have to look at it and say, hey, we need an outside cornerback. We need a starting outside cornerback. That's what I'm looking for. I think you can go about it any of those ways, but to me, I think the draft would be a pretty interesting idea. Again, without having going into prospects at this point, we'll do that. But for now, I think it's intriguing because you're in a position that a lot of teams aren't in with this draft capital. Even if it's not round, it's round 2, but with this draft capital, and at the same time where you're already at that cornerback position, like you have a proven guy in Jeff, you know what he's going to be for the most part, and he's young, but you know what he is. But you also got to keep in mind, Jerry's only got 1 year left on his deal. Jeff only has 1 year left, and then the 5th year option. So you know his price tag, if he sticks around, will go up. You would expect. It's not a bad idea to address cornerback in the 1st round, get a guy for 4 years and the 5th year. The cap hit's not going to be very expensive for the first 4 years of that deal. And you could also you should be getting a starter, and you could potentially get a number 1 out of that. With, I think, again, if you're aiming draft pick, you want to look for some of the tools. Maybe a guy that is a little bit over 6 foot, has some better length, a little bit more quick in twitch and athleticism than you're getting with some of the guys later in the draft that just don't have those tools. Like Jerry can play. He may not have all the tools, but we know the dude can play, right? So it just is what it is. But you go higher, you usually get guys with more of the tool set, and you could go that kind of direction with these high of draft picks where you could get some more tools. And I think, of course, if you're going free agency, you want a guy that's more of a playmaker. It's hard to ask all that out of a draft pick. It'd be great, but you want a guy that's a proven playmaker in the league that's just like, hey, I break up passes and I pick them off. I got 3 picks in man coverage heavy. Like, if you get that, okay, now that's interesting because that's something that a unit could really use. And then you kind of know you're bringing that to the building already. But like Brad says, build through the draft, so I wouldn't be surprised at the direction. And then the final thing would be just figuring out who's the slot cornerback for you. Like I said, I'm not surprised. I would not be surprised if Chase Lucas starts there next year. I think if you resign Will Harris, which I would be fine with, I think he becomes your slot cornerback next season. He played well. I think he has some limitations, but I like what Will Harris is, and he feels like the kind of guy the Lions would resign. I personally want to re-sign Mike Hughes, especially if you go the draft route. I'd like to re-sign Mike. You could go with a different name, but I don't think his price gets super expensive. I still think he's very young enough, and he does offer versatility, but he plays the game the way that you like. At the same time, I just think there's still a lot in the tank on the outside, and I would love to see him compete and battle and continue to, because if you brought in a draft pick, right, that's one of those things where you would anticipate he's going to start, but you still have flexibility to move guys around with Jeff, Jerry, because they're all kind of just lodging for spots. I mean, Mike Hughes was taking spots from Jeff last season, taking stats from him. They're all kind of just battling for spots. If you go sign a veteran premium free agent, you're kind of starting that guy. You could bench him, but you're also putting a lot of money to it. So it's like, we could bench the guy if the young guys take off. That's great. You could move him down if the young guys take off, but you're already allocating that kind of money. Young guy could be more natural with it, but with that said, you're just not as proven at that point. But I think I'd want to bring back Mike because I think he's still kind of lodging for a position and for playing time on the outside again next season. And that's what I would look at him as. And I think Glenn figured that toward the end of the year that this guy's better on the outside. He could play on the outside. He did well against Buffalo, did well against the Patriots. Like, he did well there. It wasn't a lot, but when he stepped in there, he did well for us. And then Will Harris feels like more of a slot. So the way I kind of look at it as, I wouldn't be shocked if both were brought back, honestly, and you have Will Harris and Chase Lucas compete with maybe Jerry Jacobs for that slot position, and then Chase has flexibility, of course. If Will doesn't win that, I think he has enough versatility, but I do think slot's his best position, so I'm not exactly sure where he'd go if he didn't start at slot. That'd be the hardest thing with him. You'd almost maybe want to leave an out if you're going to have a potential for Chase Lucas taking that spot, if you're not completely sure if he's going to win it, because if he doesn't win slot, I don't really know where he fits, and then it's kind of playing that numbers game. I think if you go free agency market or trade, you got to go draft somebody. I think if you draft somebody, you could double up in the draft. I mean, it wouldn't be a problem. You could go try to add a new slot. You could, but I think Chase Lucas could become that. So I don't think the Lions are going to want to overlap that too hard with like a second or third round pick for a guy that they think's that, and then at the same time not give Chase a chance. I could be off big time, but I think they want to give him a chance. With that, those are my thoughts. Hopefully that wasn't too crazy. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Pride, for watching, and I'm out.